My name is Daniel Harper. I was 58 years old on the evening my daughter graduated from college, and I remember that moment with a clarity that still surprises me. Not because of the graduation itself. Not because of the celebration afterward. And not even because of the speech that changed everything. I remember it because a young man wearing a navy blue suit looked me directly in the eye, smiled politely, and asked a question that revealed exactly what everyone in that room thought about me. "So, what exactly do you do, Mr. Harper?" The way he said it wasn't rude on the surface. Most insults aren't. The cruelest ones are wrapped in smiles. Around us, crystal glasses clinked together. Laughter echoed beneath the chandeliers of the university banquet hall. Parents posed for photographs. Graduates celebrated the biggest achievement of their young lives. And standing there with a paper cup of coffee instead of champagne, I suddenly understood that I wasn't being asked what I did. I was being asked what I was worth. Before I could answer, another young woman laughed softly. I think Emily said her dad works maintenance or something. Several people exchanged glances. The conversation moved on. But not before I noticed the relief in their faces. The mystery had been solved. I was the poor dad. The father who didn't belong. The father nobody needed to impress. The father they could safely ignore. I smiled. I nodded. And I stayed quiet. Because there was something none of them knew. Something my daughter didn't even fully understand. Something connected to that university going back almost 20 years. And before the night was over, the entire room would learn the truth. But this story does not start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. To understand what happened that evening, you need to understand where I came from. I grew up in a town of just under 12,000 people in western Ohio. My father repaired farm equipment. My mother worked 26 years as a school secretary. We weren't poor enough to be considered poor. But we were never comfortable. Every dollar had a purpose. Every purchase required discussion. Every unexpected expense created stress. When I was 12 years old, I wanted a bicycle that cost $89. My parents couldn't afford it. I remember sitting on the porch while my father explained the situation. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't angry. He simply told me the truth. We don't have $89 for a bicycle. That was all. No excuses. No promises. Just reality. 3 months later, after mowing lawns and carrying groceries for elderly neighbors, I bought the bicycle myself. That moment shaped me. Not because I got the bike. Because I learned something. People often measure success by what they receive. But real success is built through what you're willing to contribute. At 18, I attended a state university on scholarships, grants, and part-time jobs. I worked 40 hours a week while taking a full course load. I cleaned dormitories, stocked shelves, delivered newspapers. Anything that paid. 4 years later, I graduated with an engineering degree. By 28, I was earning $72,000 annually. By 35, I was making over $120,000. By 40, I had helped design manufacturing systems used in facilities across 6 states. On paper, I was successful. But life doesn't always care about plans. At 41, my wife Rachel was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition. The treatment costs were staggering. Insurance covered part of it. Not enough. Over the next 7 years, we spent more than $600,000 on medical care. Savings disappeared. Investments disappeared. Retirement accounts disappeared. One by one, every financial milestone we had built vanished. And I would do it again without hesitation. Because Rachel wasn't an expense. She was my wife. The woman who had laughed with me through 20 years of marriage. The woman who gave me our daughter Emily. The woman who deserved every possible chance. She fought harder than anyone I've ever known. For 7 years she battled. For 7 years she refused to quit. For 7 years she smiled through pain most people cannot imagine. And then one February morning she was gone. Emily was 17. I was 48. The house became silent. Not peaceful. Silent. There's a difference. Peace feels complete. Silence feels empty. For the next several years, everything revolved around one goal: getting Emily through college. I worked overtime, consulted on weekends, took additional contracts, sold things I didn't need, drove the same pickup truck for 14 years, postponed retirement, skipped vacations, ignored luxuries. Not because anyone forced me, because she was worth it. Emily was bright. Exceptionally bright. She graduated near the top of her high school class. She earned academic awards, leadership awards, research grants. Eventually, she was accepted into one of the most respected universities in the state. The annual cost exceeded $50,000. People assumed scholarships covered everything. They didn't. Emily earned substantial aid. But substantial isn't the same as complete. The remaining costs were significant. So I paid them. Year after year. Quietly. Without complaint. Without discussing sacrifice. Because parents aren't supposed to keep score. At least good parents aren't. Emily always appreciated what I did. But appreciation and understanding aren't the same thing. She saw tuition payments. She didn't see the contracts I accepted at midnight. She saw checks. She didn't see the exhaustion behind them. And honestly, I preferred it that way. A child should focus on becoming who they're meant to become, not on calculating what it costs their parents. By her senior year, Emily had built a social circle very different from the world she grew up in. Many of her friends came from wealthy families. Private schools, vacation homes, investment portfolios, trust funds. None of that bothered me. Money itself isn't a character flaw. Some wonderful people are wealthy. Some terrible people are wealthy. The same is true for everyone else. But there was a subtle attitude among a few members of her social circle. Not outright cruelty. Something more sophisticated. They viewed financial success as evidence of personal value. The richer someone was, the more important they seemed. The poorer someone was, the less attention they deserved. I noticed it during visits. Small comments, tiny assumptions, questions that revealed their worldview. What kind of car does your dad drive? Where do your parents vacation? What neighborhood are you from? Not malicious, just revealing. The answers helped them categorize people. And once people are categorized, they're often treated accordingly. Emily didn't think that way. But influence is powerful. Over time, she became accustomed to environments where wealth carried social weight. I understood. It's human nature. Still, there was one memory from my childhood that kept resurfacing. When I was 13, a wealthy classmate named Brandon invited several students to his birthday party. His family lived in a massive house overlooking a golf course. During the party, one of Brandon's relatives asked what my father did for work. When I answered, the man nodded politely. Then he turned away before I had even finished speaking, as though the information had reduced my value. I remember standing there holding a slice of cake, feeling invisible. That feeling stayed with me. Not because it hurt, because it taught me something important. Many people don't evaluate who you are. They evaluate the category they place you in. And once they make that decision, changing their minds becomes difficult. Nearly 45 years later, I would experience that exact same feeling again. Only this time, the consequences would be very different. Graduation weekend arrived on a bright Saturday morning. Thousands of families flooded the campus. Photographs were everywhere. Caps, gowns, flowers, tears, pride, hope. The energy was contagious. I sat among hundreds of parents and watched Emily cross the stage. When her name was announced, I stood immediately. My hands hurt from clapping. I didn't care. For a few seconds, all the sacrifices felt visible. Not because anyone else saw them. Because I did. I remembered every late-night drive. Every payment. Every difficult decision. Every moment Rachel should have been there but wasn't. And I felt proud. Not of myself. Of Emily. After the ceremony, graduates and families moved toward a large evening celebration, hosted by several student organizations and donors. The event was elegant. Far more elegant than anything I typically attended. The banquet hall could seat nearly 800 people. White tablecloths covered every surface. Servers moved through the crowd, carrying trays of expensive food. String musicians performed near the entrance. I arrived wearing the best suit I owned. It was 9 years old. Still in excellent condition, but clearly different from many of the designer suits surrounding me. I noticed, and apparently others noticed too. To be continued. The first signs appeared almost immediately. Not dramatic signs. Small ones. The kind people often pretend not to notice. Emily was pulled into a cluster of graduates near the center of the hall. Cameras flashed every few seconds. Parents mingled, conversations overlapped, the atmosphere felt warm and celebratory. For a while I stood back and watched. I preferred it that way. Graduation belonged to her. Not me. A few minutes later, Emily waved me over. "Dad, come meet everyone." I walked across the room. Emily introduced me to nearly a dozen people. Most were polite. Several were genuinely kind. But a handful reacted differently. The moment they learned I was Emily's father, they performed quick calculations in their heads. Not mathematical calculations. Social ones. What do you do? Where do you live? What do you drive? How much influence do you have? How useful are you? The answers determined everything. I had seen it before. The older you get, the easier it becomes to recognize. One young man named Tyler seemed especially interested. He was 22. Confident. Well-dressed. The son of a real estate developer, whose name appeared on several campus buildings. Tyler smiled constantly. But his eyes evaluated everything. I noticed it within 30 seconds. "So, Mr. Harper," he said, extending his hand, "Emily talks about you all the time. Hopefully good things." He laughed. "I'm sure." Then came the question. "What line of work are you in?" "Engineering." So, there was a brief pause. "What company?" I told him. The consulting firm was small. Respected in its field. Unknown outside it. His interest visibly declined. Not intentionally. Automatically. Like a light dimming. A few others nearby exchanged glances. The conversation shifted toward investment firms, startup companies, and family businesses. Nobody directly excluded me. They simply stopped including me. It's an important distinction. Being ignored often hurts more than being insulted. At least insults acknowledge your existence. I listened quietly. A young woman named Madison discussed her father's venture capital fund. Another graduate talked about a family-owned chain of medical clinics. Someone mentioned a private island vacation. Another described a summer spent traveling through Europe. The stories continued. One after another. Meanwhile, I held a paper cup of coffee. And listened. Eventually, Madison looked toward me. What about you, Mr. Harper? Any big travel plans? I smiled. Not at the moment. No. Thinking about replacing my roof this summer. A few people laughed politely. The conversation immediately moved elsewhere. I wasn't offended. Actually, I found it interesting. Most people reveal themselves when speaking to someone they consider unimportant. That's when masks disappear. That's when priorities become visible. Over the next hour, I watched dozens of interactions unfold. Parents networking. Graduates exchanging contacts. Families discussing careers. Everyone seemed to be sorting people into invisible categories. Potential opportunity. Potential connection. Potential advantage. Or none of the above. I had occupied the last category before. It wasn't new. What surprised me was how openly some people did it. At one point, I overheard two fathers discussing employment opportunities. One mentioned a company looking for executives. The other immediately introduced his son. A third parent approached. Within moments, they were exchanging numbers. Standing just a few feet away, another graduate who lacked similar connections might as well have been invisible. Nobody intended harm. Yet the result was the same. Doors opened for some. Remained closed for others. That reality bothered me less than it once had. Life isn't fair. It never has been. The important thing is how you respond. About an hour into the celebration, Emily found me near a side table. You okay? I smiled. Of course. You look tired. I am tired. She laughed. Fair. For a moment, we stood together watching the crowd. Then she leaned against my shoulder. The same way she used to when she was 12 years old. The same way she had after her mother died. The same way she did whenever life felt overwhelming. And suddenly, none of the social politics mattered. Not the wealthy families. Not the assumptions. Not the subtle dismissals. Just my daughter. Happy. Successful. Healthy. Rachel would have loved this moment. The thought hit me unexpectedly. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Emily noticed. You thinking about Moms? I nodded. She squeezed my arm. So am I. Neither of us said anything else. We didn't need to. Some grief becomes permanent. Not painful every day. Just permanent. Like a scar. Always present. Always part of you. After a while, Emily returned to her friends. I remained near the edge of the room. That's when I met one of the few people who treated me differently. A professor named Dr. Alan Mitchell. He was in his early 70s. Sharp-eyed. Thoughtful. The kind of person who actually listened when others spoke. We had met briefly several years earlier during a campus visit. I didn't expect him to remember me. Yet he walked directly toward me. Daniel Harper. I blinked. Professor Mitchell. He smiled. Still refusing to retire. I laughed. Apparently. Good. We spoke for nearly 15 minutes. Research. Education. Engineering. Student mentorship. Real conversations. Not status conversations. Not networking conversations. Actual conversations. Several people nearby seemed surprised. I could almost see them wondering why a respected senior professor appeared so interested in speaking with the maintenance-looking father nobody knew. The answer was simple. Dr. Mitchell knew something they didn't. Not the whole story. Just enough. Before leaving, he shook my hand. I'm glad you're here tonight. The statement sounded ordinary. But something about his tone felt significant. Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone. I didn't think much of it. At least not then. Another hour passed. Dinner began. Large round tables filled the ballroom. Families settled into assigned seating. I found my place near several graduates and parents I had met earlier. Tyler sat across from me. Madison sat nearby. The conversations resumed. Careers, money, future plans, business opportunities, luxury apartments, starting salaries. Everything seemed to revolve around achievement measured in financial terms. At one point, Tyler mentioned a consulting offer worth nearly $200,000 annually. Several people reacted with admiration. One father raised his glass. "That's outstanding." Tyler smiled modestly. "It worked out." Then someone asked me a question. "So what was your starting salary after college, Mr. Harper?" The table looked toward me. I thought for a moment. $26,000. A few people chuckled. Not cruelly. Just surprised. One graduate nearly spit out his drink. "Seriously?" I nodded. "It was a long time ago." Tyler laughed. "My internship paid more than that." Several people joined him. Again, not openly malicious. "Just thoughtless." There's a difference. Most hurtful comments aren't designed to wound. They're simply careless. Still, I noticed Emily shifting uncomfortably in her chair. She heard it too. I decided to help. "Then you're off to a better start than I had." The tension eased. Conversation moved on. But something had changed. The comments became more frequent. More casual. As though my willingness to laugh at myself had granted permission. One person joked about old pickup trucks. Another joked about retirement savings. Someone asked whether I planned to finally relax now that tuition payments were over. The implication was clear. They viewed me as a hard-working but ordinary man. Respectable, limited, unremarkable. And perhaps that's exactly what I appeared to be. By appearance alone, their conclusion made sense. The problem was that appearances rarely tell the full story. Especially not mine. About halfway through dinner, Tyler leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Emily always talks about how much her dad sacrificed." I nodded. "She's kind." "Still," he continued, "it must be nice seeing the investment finally pay off." The table laughed. I smiled politely. "What do you mean?" "Your daughter graduates from one of the best universities in the state. Great career prospects, great future." He raised his glass. Not a bad return. Several people laughed again. Emily didn't. I could see embarrassment in her expression. Not because of me. Because of him. For the first time all evening, she spoke sharply. "That's not why Dad helped me." Tyler looked surprised. "I was joking." "I know." The room grew quiet. Tyler quickly changed subjects. But the moment lingered. And for the first time that evening, I realized something. Emily was beginning to notice what I had noticed hours earlier. The assumptions, the categorizing, the dismissiveness, the subtle belief that money determined importance. She wasn't angry. She was disappointed. There is a difference. Disappointment often hurts more. Dinner continued. Dessert arrived. Coffee followed. Eventually, the university announced that several closing remarks would be given before the evening concluded. Most people barely paid attention. The celebration had already lasted several hours. Conversations continued. Phones appeared. People prepared to leave. Nobody expected anything unusual. Neither did I. Then I noticed movement near the stage. Several senior administrators were gathering. Department chairs, trustees, faculty leaders. And standing among them was the university president himself. A distinguished man named Richard Calloway. I had met him only once, nearly 20 years earlier. And the moment I saw him looking into the crowd, something deep inside me stirred. Because suddenly I remembered a promise. A promise made long ago. A promise almost nobody knew existed. And as President Calloway stepped toward the microphone, I began to realize that this evening might not end the way anyone expected. For a moment I didn't move. 800 people were looking at me. I hated that. Not because I was nervous. Because attention has always felt uncomfortable. When you spend most of your life building things behind the scenes, you get used to being invisible. Engineers don't usually stand on stages. We stand beside them. We design the structures. Other people stand in the spotlight. That arrangement had always suited me. But now there was nowhere to hide. President Calloway was waiting. Faculty members were watching. Trustees were smiling. And my daughter was staring at me as if she was seeing an entirely different person. Slowly I stood. The room erupted into applause. Not polite applause. Real applause. The kind that starts in one section and spreads until everyone is standing. I immediately wished they would stop. Instead, they got louder. I looked toward Emily. Tears were running down her cheeks. Not because of the scholarship. Not because of the recognition. Because she was realizing how much of my life she had never seen. A child only witnesses the visible sacrifices. The invisible ones remain hidden. Those are often the largest. I walked toward the stage. Every step felt strangely unreal. As I passed tables, expressions blurred together. Shock, confusion, embarrassment, admiration, regret. I saw all of them. When I reached the stairs, Professor Mitchell met me halfway. He smiled. I apologize. For what? We knew you'd hate this. I laughed despite myself. You're right. We decided it was worth it anyway. I shook my head. Then we walked onto the stage. The applause continued. President Calloway extended his hand. I shook it. Then he leaned closer. Thank you for forgiving us. I haven't decided whether I forgive you yet. He laughed. The audience laughed with him. The tension eased. A microphone appeared in front of me. I immediately wished it hadn't. Calloway gestured toward the crowd. Daniel, would you like to say a few words? No. The answer came instantly. The audience laughed again. Calloway smiled. I expected that. I turned toward him. Can I say 3 sentences? Of course. I stepped closer to the microphone. The ballroom became completely silent. For several seconds, I simply looked at the crowd. Not because I was preparing a speech. Because I wasn't. I genuinely had no idea what to say. Eventually, I found Emily in the audience. Then the words came naturally. Everything important in my life happened because someone gave me an opportunity I hadn't earned yet. Silence. I've spent the last 40 years trying to repay that debt. Maury, silence. Then I looked directly at my daughter. And tonight I'm far prouder of her than I am of anything I've ever done. The room exploded into applause again. I stepped away from the microphone immediately. That was enough. More than enough. But before I could leave, President Calloway spoke again. There is one more thing. I stopped. The audience quieted. Calloway turned toward Emily. Would Emily Harper please join us? The room applauded once more. Emily looked stunned. She glanced toward me. I shrugged. Apparently, I was no longer the only victim of surprises. A few moments later, she joined us on stage. The audience stood again. Parents, graduates, faculty, everyone. Emily reached me and immediately wrapped her arms around me. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. The hug lasted longer than most public hugs do. Long enough for people to understand. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about scholarships. It was about a father and daughter who had carried each other through difficult years. Eventually she stepped back. Her eyes were still wet. So that's why Professor Mitchell always looked at you funny. I laughed. Probably. And that's why some administrators knew your name. Maybe. And that's why nobody would answer my questions whenever I asked about the scholarship fund. I nodded. Definitely. For the first time all evening, she laughed through her tears. The audience loved it. A few minutes later, the formal ceremony ended. People began leaving their tables. Conversations erupted everywhere. But the atmosphere had completely changed. Not because people suddenly respected wealth. Many had already respected wealth. The difference was that they had discovered something unexpected. They had learned how badly they had misjudged someone. And that realization is uncomfortable. Especially for intelligent people. Intelligent people expect their judgments to be accurate. When they aren't, the correction can be painful. The first person to approach me was not a trustee. Not a donor. Not a university official. It was Tyler. He looked genuinely embarrassed. Not performatively embarrassed. Actually embarrassed. There's a difference. Mr. Harper. I smiled. Tyler. He rubbed the back of his neck. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. He took a breath. I was arrogant tonight. I didn't respond. He continued. I thought I understood people. A sad smile crossed his face. Turns out I mostly understand bank accounts. That level of honesty surprised me. Most people defend themselves. Tyler wasn't. He looked disappointed in himself. And oddly enough, that made me like him more. Growth often begins with embarrassment. I appreciate that, I said. He nodded. Then he looked toward Emily. Your dad is impressive. Emily smiled. I know. The answer made me laugh. Tyler left. A few minutes later, Madison approached. Her reaction was different. More thoughtful. Less emotional. I keep replaying tonight in my head. Why? Because nothing about you matched the story I created. I smiled. That happens. She looked down. I didn't mean to judge you. I know. But I did. Yes. She sighed. Then she laughed softly. You're making this impossible. How? You're being too nice. I shrugged. I've made enough mistakes to be patient with other people's. She smiled. And for a moment I could almost see a worldview shifting. Not dramatically. Not permanently. Just slightly. Sometimes that's enough. Over the next hour, dozens of people approached. Parents, graduates, faculty members. Many congratulated me. Others thanked me. Several apologized. A few seemed determined to explain why they had misjudged me. Those conversations interested me most. Because almost nobody admitted to judging based on wealth. Instead, they used other language. Status. Connections. Influence. Presentation. Success. Different words. Same idea. Human beings have always searched for shortcuts. We categorize because it saves time. The problem is that categories hide individuals. And once that happens, we stop seeing people clearly. Near the end of the evening, Professor Mitchell found me again. This time he was carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me. I figured champagne wasn't your style. Good decision. We stood near a window overlooking the campus. Students crossed the grounds below. Families posed for photographs. The night felt peaceful. After a while he spoke. "You know what impressed me most?" "What?" "The scholarship wasn't the remarkable part." I looked at him. "Then what was it?" He nodded toward Emily. Her. I followed his gaze. She was laughing with friends nearby. Happy, confident, excited about the future. Mitchell smiled. "Money can fund opportunities. Pause. Character creates them." I thought about that for a moment. Then I nodded. Because he was right. The scholarship had helped students. But Emily represented something different. Something harder. The ability to endure loss without becoming bitter. The ability to succeed without becoming entitled. The ability to remain kind in a world that often rewards the opposite. Rachel deserved much of the credit for that. More than anyone knew. As the evening wound down, people gradually left. The ballroom emptied. Chairs were folded. Lights dimmed. Staff members began cleaning. Eventually, only a handful of guests remained. Emily and I walked slowly across campus. Just the two of us. The same campus she had arrived at 4 years earlier. The same campus she was now leaving. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then she finally broke the silence. "Dad." "Yes. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I knew exactly what she meant. "The scholarship." She nodded. "Any of it?" I thought carefully before answering. Because some truths deserve precision. When your mother got sick, I learned something. "What?" "Life is unpredictable." She listened quietly. So I decided there were only a few things worth measuring. I looked across the campus. How we treat people. Pause. What we build. Pause. And what we leave behind. She squeezed my arm. The same way her mother used to. And in that moment, under the campus lights, I realized something beautiful. The university president's speech hadn't revealed my secret contribution. Not really. The scholarship fund wasn't the most important thing I had created. Emily was. And that was worth more than any recognition the world could ever give. The next morning, I assumed life would return to normal. I was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. No television crews appeared at my front door. No newspaper headlines changed my life. No sudden transformation occurred. Instead, something far more interesting happened. People started paying attention. Not to my money. Not to the scholarship. To the story. And stories have a strange kind of power. For 20 years, I had quietly existed in the background of other people's lives. Now, suddenly, people wanted to know how a man they had mistaken for an ordinary working-class father had funded a scholarship program that supported hundreds of students. The funny thing was that the answer wasn't exciting. There was no secret inheritance. No lottery ticket. No tech startup worth billions. No dramatic windfall. Just 40 years of work. Thousands of long days. Thousands of careful decisions. And one very specific promise. The morning after graduation, Emily and I met for breakfast before she left campus. The restaurant was crowded with families saying goodbye. Graduates hugged friends. Parents loaded cars. The future was beginning. Emily sat across from me staring into her coffee. She had been unusually quiet. Finally, she looked up. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How much did you give?" I laughed. Straight to the difficult questions. She smiled slightly. "Seriously." I stirred my coffee. The original endowment was $3 million. Her eyes widened. Even though she knew something significant had happened, hearing the actual number made it real. 3 million. I nodded. Over time it grew. She stared at me. For several seconds she didn't speak. Then she shook her head. I don't understand. Which part? Any of it? I smiled. Fair question. So I told her the story. The whole story. Or at least most of it. Back when I was 23, I had been working for a manufacturing company during an internship. One afternoon, a senior engineer took an interest in me. Not because I was exceptional. Because I worked hard. That engineer eventually recommended me for a position that changed my career. The promotion doubled my income. The next opportunity doubled it again. Over time, those opportunities compounded. One act of belief created another. Then another. Then another. Eventually, decades later, I found myself in a position to help someone else. So I did. Simple. Not easy. But simple. Emily listened quietly. Then she asked the question I should have expected. If Mom hadn't gotten sick, would you have told me? I looked out the window. For a moment, I saw Rachel exactly as she had been 20 years earlier. Standing in our kitchen. Laughing at one of my terrible jokes. Healthy. Happy. Alive. The memory hurt. But less than it once had. Probably not. Emily nodded. Because you'd think it was bragging. Exactly. She laughed. That sounds like you. We finished breakfast. Then we walked outside. Cars were pulling away from the dormitories. Parents were saying final goodbyes. Graduates were stepping into new lives. The campus felt different now. Like a chapter ending. Before we reached her car, Emily stopped. Dad, yes, you know what bothered me most last night? I expected her to mention Tyler. Or Madison. Or the assumptions people made. Instead, she surprised me. I realized how many times I probably did the same thing. I frowned. What do you mean? She looked down. I don't think I judged people because of money. Good. But I definitely judged people because of appearances. That answer impressed me. Because it was honest. Most people only notice the judgments directed toward themselves. They rarely notice the ones they direct at others. Emily continued. I thought I was more aware than that. You probably are. Not enough. I smiled. None of us are. She nodded. Then she hugged me one more time before leaving. As I watched her drive away, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not happiness. Not pride. Peace. The kind that arrives when you know your child is ready. A week later, I returned to work. And that's when the second surprise arrived. The university president called. Personally. When his name appeared on my phone, I assumed something was wrong. It turned out he wanted lunch. I almost declined. Then curiosity won. 3 days later, we met at a small restaurant near campus. No cameras. No publicity. Just lunch. Exactly the way I preferred it. Calloway arrived carrying a folder. The moment I saw it, I became suspicious. What's in the folder? He smiled. Paper. That's not reassuring. He laughed. Then he opened it. Inside were reports. Scholarship reports. Graduate outcomes. Employment statistics. Academic achievements. Success stories. For nearly an hour he showed me data. Numbers. Names. Results. Student after student. Engineer. Doctor. Teacher. Research scientist. Business owner. Military officer. Community leader. Lives transformed by opportunities they otherwise might not have received. At one point I stopped him. Why are you showing me this? His answer was immediate. Because you never asked. I stared at him. He continued, most donors want updates. Pause. Most donors want recognition. Pause. Most donors want influence. Another pause. You never wanted any of those things. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said something I will never forget. Daniel, do you know how rare that is? I didn't answer. Because I genuinely didn't know. Calloway closed the folder. People think generosity is about giving money. He shook his head. It's usually about surrendering control. That stayed with me. Long after lunch ended. Long after I drove home. Long after the conversation was over. Because he was right. Anyone can attach conditions to a gift. The harder thing is releasing ownership. Trusting others to use it well. Trusting the future. Trusting people you'll never meet. Several months passed. Summer turned into fall. Life settled into routine again. Or at least mostly. Emily started her career. The university moved forward. The graduation story gradually faded. As most stories do. But every now and then something unexpected happened. A former scholarship recipient would contact me. Not often. A few times each year. A letter. An email. Occasionally a phone call. Most weren't dramatic. One former student simply wrote, "You helped pay for my education. Today I hired my first employee." Another message said, "My daughter starts kindergarten next week, thank you." One former recipient had become a physician. Another had started a non-profit organization. Another was teaching mathematics at a public school. None of them mentioned money. Not directly. Instead, they talked about possibilities. Doors. Opportunities. Second chances. And every time I read those messages, I thought about that engineer who helped me when I was 23. Because every system starts somewhere. People imagine success as a ladder. One person climbing higher and higher. But that isn't how life works. Success behaves more like a bridge. Someone builds part of it. Then someone else extends it. Then someone else continues. Eventually people cross without knowing who built the earlier sections. And that's okay. The bridge matters more than the builder. 2 years after Emily's graduation, the university invited me back. This time I couldn't avoid it. A new scholarship center was opening. The trustees wanted me there. I argued. I delayed. I complained. None of it worked. When I arrived, I noticed something immediately. There was no giant plaque. No building named after me. No oversized portrait. Exactly as I had requested. Instead, above the entrance was a simple inscription. One sentence. No name attached. Just a sentence. Opportunity becomes meaningful when it is shared. I stood there staring at it. Then I laughed. Because Rachel would have loved it. Simple. Direct. No ego. No performance. Just truth. That afternoon I spoke briefly with several students. One young man asked a question that reminded me of Tyler years earlier. The difference was that his intention was completely different. What should success look like? I thought carefully. Then answered honestly. Success should make more people successful. The student frowned. That's it. That's it. He looked disappointed. I laughed. Because young people often expect complicated wisdom. Life rarely provides it. The best lessons are usually simple. Not easy. Simple. As the event ended, I walked across campus alone. Students hurried between classes. Professors carried books. Life continued. And for a moment, I found myself thinking about that graduation celebration years earlier. The comments, The assumptions, the awkward conversations, the embarrassment on certain faces after the truth emerged. Interestingly, none of that mattered anymore. Time had stripped away the emotional details. What remained was the lesson. The real lesson. Not that wealthy people were wrong. Not that poor people were right. Not that hidden success is noble. Not even that appearances can be deceiving. Those lessons were too small. The real lesson was larger. Entire systems exist around us. Systems of status. Systems of assumption. Systems of judgment. Most people don't consciously create them. They simply inherit them, then participate without noticing. The system tells us who deserves attention, who deserves respect, who deserves opportunity. And too often, those decisions are based on visible signals rather than actual character. Money, titles, clothing, addresses, connections. The system isn't evil, just incomplete. Because character rarely announces itself. Integrity doesn't wear a name tag. Sacrifice doesn't introduce itself. Kindness rarely demands recognition. The most important things about a person are often invisible. And that's why so many people get overlooked. Not because they lack value. Because value and visibility are not the same thing. That is what Tyler learned. What Madison learned. What Emily learned. And perhaps what everyone in that ballroom learned. Including me. Because even after all those years, I needed the reminder too. The poor dad. The rich dad. The successful dad. The ordinary dad. Those were